When you look back with love, not fear, you unlock the gifts inside the hardest moments. For my guest on this week's Fearless Forward podcast, what changed everything wasn't his horrific accident. It was the moment he decided not to be defined by it. I'm Sally Ann Airy, and welcome to Fearless Forward, the podcast that asks leaders how they face their fears. Today I'm in conversation with someone whose life exemplifies courage. His story is one of thriving against all the odds. 33 years ago, at the age of 14, Marc Convey suffered burns so horrific that he barely survived them. Years of painful treatment followed, starting with over 30 operations in less than 4 years, and the prospect of being at the very least physically scarred for life. But Marc made a pivotal decision: to take responsibility for his own recovery and not to allow trauma to define his future. With massive support from his family, friends, and many others, Marc got well enough to go back to school and on to university. He moved forward, step by step. He rebuilt not just his body, but his sense of who he could become. Driven by his strong belief that if you make the effort to develop the inner resources to face what has happened, you can survive any hardship and forge a new path, and that's what he did. For 15 years, he travelled the world doing something he loved. He became a reporter and journalist for poker tournaments, and later a video producer with his own company. Over time, he realised that his real gifts were his presence and his story. Today, Marc inspires others through his writing, campaigning, and public speaking to find their own strength in adversity and to use this as a springboard for growth. And right now, he's finding the space he needs to write his first book. I'm turning the gifts of my own story, he says, into something that might help others to discover theirs. In our conversation, we explore what it means to overcome setbacks, face an uncertain future without anxiety, and work with our fears to build resilience. So, Marc, tell us, there you were, a young boy aged 14 playing with your mates. What happened?
I was actually playing with my cousin in Ireland. So I was 14 years old, and I joined my first cousin Brendan and a friend of his at the back of his house, and they were playing with caps and matches. So just kind of wrapping caps that you were putting a cap gun around some coins, throwing them into the ground with some matches, and it created a little bang. So homemade bangers, I guess. My cousin's friend left to go home, and we were left just with a box of matches. And the rain, there was a big electrical storm in. So this was in the west of Ireland on holiday, where most of my family are from. And we ventured inside to get cover from the rain into the garage that was adjacent to his house, and just made some silly decisions, just trying to get this box of matches to flare up with the use of a bit of petrol, and adolescent mistakes, and very, very cliche, unfortunately, to kick off this conversation with. But the petrol can caught fire, and it fell over and created a wall of flames in front of me, in between myself and my cousin. Luckily, he was able to back out of the only doors that you could get in and out of the garage. And I think I went into panic mode. For a long time, I thought that the flames came up a lot quicker than they did. And the reality is, I found out from another cousin who was upstairs in the house and raised the alarm that I probably had more time to get out than I realised. So that's something I've had to come to terms with in the last few years, when really going back into my story and trying to find out all the details of it. I froze in that moment, and in that moment when freezing, I think really that was the bit of fear was, we're going to get in loads of trouble here. And I think the fear itself wasn't necessarily a primal fear of thinking I'm about to die here. It was more, oh my God, like we're in a world of trouble. And, that's where a 14-year-old mind goes to. And having those thoughts go through my mind meant that then it was too late by the time it was to do anything. And the heat and the smoke meant that I passed out onto the garage floor. And then obviously it was huge panic outside and around me. And my immediate family who were there, my mum and my little sister and my extended family were in the house. The alarm was raised, and it was a battle to try and get them out. They couldn't get hold of the emergency services. This was rural Ireland in 1992 and no one was even picking up. It could well be that there was already some other incidences going on with this huge electrical storm that was covering the country. And yeah, for a while, there were thoughts within some of my family that they might not even find a body, let alone find me alive. And all within that time, I'm lying on the floor, not on flames, thankfully, just the, all the damage that you might see from many photos of me online is just from pure heat. And I went into a crazy near-death experience that I won't go into like loads of the details for here. And it's something that I've not tried to make too much sense of. I did hear voices of people that I thought might be ancestors past. I heard my uncle's voice, who was very much alive and outside, who was the one encouraging me to come back because I still had great things to do. Whereas the other voices I heard were almost like guiding me towards them and saying, if you do want to come with us, it will be fine. Now, I don't know if there is an afterlife. I don't know if this is chemicals going on in my brain. It's something that I'm never going to be able to prove, so I don't spend much time dwelling on it. What I do take from that experience is that I made a choice to live in that moment. And as soon as I made that choice to live, bang, I was awake. Suddenly, bang, I was on my feet. And this is burning building all around me. But my singular focus is on this small little shattered window, which is one of the last things I remember my cousin Brendan doing when he was running around the outside of the garage. He smashed it with his wrist, obviously trying to find a way to get me in. And I don't know if it was adrenaline or divine intervention or whatever, but it felt like two great hands just grabbed me around the waist and my buttocks and just picked me up and just threw me through this window. So I went propelling through this small little window, got one tiny little cut on my ankle and rolled onto the dirt outside. And then I could hear, he's out, from my cousins. And my uncle made some really, being a secondary school teacher who'd actually just that year had health and safety training on what to do if one of his students suffered severe burns. Very good timing for that health and safety course, made some critical decisions that later gave me the 3 to 4% chance that I had of surviving. He was told that if he hadn't done those things, then I probably wouldn't have even made it to the first hospital or the second hospital. So then I was bundled into the back of his car with my mum alongside me, which was, probably the most horrendous journey of all three of our lives. The next bit of fear came in for me that, again, I was maybe just worried about getting in trouble, or maybe I was fearful that I was about to check out. And I was just really worried that my cousin was going to get in trouble for, having a hand in ending my life. So it became a chant almost in the back of that car of just saying, don't blame Brendan, don't blame Brendan, don't blame Brendan. And I think that kept me conscious, actually, and stopped me blacking out, because the pain, as you can't imagine, because no one can imagine, was beyond anything that's possible for anyone. And thankfully that no one has an imagination to be able to go to that place. And at one point, and I don't remember this, but this is what my mum told me within the last couple of years since I've been going back over my story and writing about it, that I asked several times to allow them to let me to die because the pain was too much. But anyway, my uncle drove like a madman through, lightning storms and rain and wrong side of the road, and just did everything he could to get me to the local hospital, which was 10 or 11 miles away, I think. And they spent 2 or 3 hours stabilising me, but then they needed to get me to St James's Hospital in Dublin because that was the only burns unit in the country that was capable of dealing with my injuries. But yeah, that time in Ireland, 1992, there was no air ambulances that could operate overnight. So I was into the back of an ambulance, 4-hour journey across country, flatlined twice on the way. So they were telling my mum in the front that they were just changing drips. So I was fighting for my life in the back. Anyway, managed to get to Dublin. They put me into a coma while all my organs were trying to give up on me one by one, because the skin is our biggest organ and 38% of my skin was burned. So that was putting huge amounts of pressure on my internal organs. I was swelled up, apparently, head the size of a big balloon, because my head's pretty big anyway. Yeah, they stabilised me, brought me out of the coma. Then someone didn't read my medical file that had big red writing on it saying I was severely allergic to penicillin, and that was administered to me, and that nearly killed me. So I had to go back into a coma. So it was like, I'm like, come on, people, I'm trying to do my best here. Can you not step up and help me out? But then we got through that, and that was the initial real impact, trauma. That was the kind of the accident part of what happened, and then a long road to recovery after that.
A long road to recovery, and over 30 operations in the few years that followed. I mean, that's incomprehensible to most of us.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like an absurd question, but I have to ask it. What do you remember about how you felt, or how your feelings evolved, if they did, during that period?
It's a really interesting one, and it's I have to be sort of conscious of what I remember, and then how I then look back and analyze what's going on. So, as you know, and we'll get more into this later, I'm writing a book that's part memoir and parts narrative nonfiction, and kind of philosophical, spiritually trying to make sense of it. And our memories work in strange ways. The memories from present day that I look back, and how much they are the same as the memories at the time, I'm not sure. But I'm not too fussed about that, because I'm trying to use the memories in a way that serve me and the people around me today.
Okay.
So I think the early stages, and this is the section in my book that I'm calling the body section, whether or not that's just a working title for me or will be in the book, I don't know, but really the body takes over to start with. It's pure survival, right? It's every single day I might not make it through the night. I was given a 3 to 4% chance of survival. And obviously going through that many operations, there's risk as well. And they weren't just a lot of them simple operations. They were complicated operations where I was donor and recipient at the same time. So you're almost doubling up, slicing bits of skin from the back of your thighs, they're cutting out chunks of flesh to fill in areas where scars have contracted, hammering pins through your hands, like moving things around. So I was being augmented all the time. So they were nasty operations to have to go through. But yeah, to start with, it was just survival and not making sense of it and not thinking too much. The first 2 months of my recovery were in Dublin, and I'm sure they did their best, but they were a very inexperienced burns unit, recently opened, and according to the world-class care I got when I got back in London, some big mistakes were made. And there was an obvious lack of trust from my family to how I was being looked after, which really put a huge emphasis on getting me back to get the best treatment I had, because especially with burns, time is your enemy and you have to act quickly, because scar tissue, if you don't treat it really quickly, it can have a huge impact on how you look for the rest of your life. And once it settles, it's relentless in its want to tighten and to rise and to pull your body in all sorts of directions. So you've got to act quickly. So I had 3 operations over those weeks in Dublin, which were some not very good hand operations, which left me with a lot less mobility than I would have had for the rest of my life, and some skin grafts. And then when I got back I had gone on a commercial flight as well. There was no way they could get me on any other flight. So, I was still in a really bad way, and then having to go on an Aer Lingus flight. Luckily, I got the VIP treatment and was straight to the bottom steps of the ladder. But, going up and sitting in the front, and that was my first exposure to people seeing me as well. Because at that point, I was I looked like a right state. Anyway, we got me back to Queen Mary's Hospital in Roehampton, which sadly is no longer there anymore. But it was probably one of the best units in the world that I could have been in at that point in time. But they were very, very quick to say, especially to my mum, like Dr. John Clark, he was a pioneer in the field, absolutely just genius, but one of these geniuses that kind of walks and straddles the line of madness as well, in the very, very old school, and super blunt, didn't mess around and said it, as it was. He's in a right mess and we need to get cracking as quickly as possible. And then he challenged me that as well. He maybe didn't say it quite as directly as he said it to my mum, but he said it in a way to see, are you ready for this? Because we're really going to go for it. And he didn't necessarily give me all the details of what was about to come, but he wanted to G me up. And it really worked for me. His style of leadership, the sort of the character traits that I had, my stubbornness, my competitiveness, these things that became my superpower. It's almost like he intuitively tapped into who I was and knew that I could take it, and knew that I was someone that wanted information to a certain degree. But I'm very glad that he didn't tell me that between the end of September and Christmas time, I would have had another 17 operations.
Oof.
So, yeah, my first week there was Operation Monday, Operation Wednesday, Operation Friday.
Gosh.
Then, got a bit easier and it was 2 a week. But, yeah, it was utterly relentless for that time.
What an extraordinary individual. And how fortunate, if I can use that word, in the circumstances that you were able to be his patient. And both his, technical skill and his manner that supported you, met you where you were, as you say. Stubborn and competitive. I'd love to come back to that later. I imagine that's an influence in your life. But at that time, there you were in London, continuing the slow journey, rapid reactions, but slow journey of recovery. And I suppose all you could do was take it day by day. Is that how it felt?
Yeah, absolutely. There were certain things that would drive one insane if you didn't take it day by day. In Dublin, every day I had to endure 2 hours of dressing changes, and they would wheel me down to this room, and it's this massive, huge steel bath, and you'd see them just pouring bricks of salt into this bath, and then put me on a platform and lower me down onto it. And every single day they would change every single bandage that they could. It was 2 hours of torture. And luckily they gave me Entonox, but actually they were a little bit too giving of medicine in Dublin, because they gave me way too much morphine as well for a 14-year-old, and then had to cold turkey me. So for 4 days during that 3 days, 4 days, 3 nights, I had to cold turkey off morphine, and my mum rarely left my bedside. So in the middle of all that and trying to survive, I was just hallucinating, marching up and down corridors, having fevers. At one point I just thought I was in a Roman garden, like rock garden, and being fed grapes by a nurse. Really, it was just lemon swabs. And yeah, my mum said it was a horrific experience to me go through that. So that was another thing that they shouldn't have done. But obviously the pain was so great, they needed to manage it somehow. But they managed it much more effectively when I got into Roehampton. But yeah, going back to those dressing changes, my mum remembers, so say do 9 till 11 in the morning, and then wheel me back to my room and put me back in my bed or my chair. And my mum said immediately I'd be massively anxious about what was coming in 22 hours time. I just couldn't get it out of my brain. In the face of that adversity, we just had to learn to become present. It was initially just a survival instinct. This is the only way you can do, and you just start to really focus on the small things and news back home and stories of well-wishing, humour. Humour was massive, and dark humour. And, another trait that I had and still have is that I've got this really cheeky personality, and dark humour and quick wit. And that was probably the biggest asset that I had, because not only could you start to make light of situations, it helps you to build relationships with your caregivers in a way that makes their experience better looking after you, and you build this deep connection. And humour was a big part of that. So the more we could flood our days with humour and distraction and being in the moment, the less I would fear about what was coming up.
Yeah.
And then bit by bit, you just get to cope with that, and the anxiety level comes down. So some of the hardest experiences were the biggest lifelong lessons were learned.
Incredible. So in mundane terms, anxiety being the fear of an uncertain future, your fear of the next operation in 22 hours' time, or the next pain that you were going to experience. And so the antidote was to bring yourself into the present, was to look for the opposite of fear, joy, I suppose, through the humour, through the connection, through the relationships, and knowing that as you built that connection, inevitably the care improves. Not that it's technically any different, I don't suppose, for one moment, but the relationship is so important, isn't it? Our attitude to healing, and there's so much about this that has been researched, but I'm sure there's an awful lot that we would probably never understand about that, but our attitude to healing. What part do you can't know, but I just love your sense of what part you feel your attitude played in your healing process.
I think it was, a huge part. a lot of people who come and know me and, understand the story just from me telling it, a lot of them think it's that, well, you were born this way and, you had everything that you needed to cope with this. And there's an element of truth in this, right? We've covered the stubborn, determined, competitive, curious, dark sense of humour. So all these things, within the right context, became my superpowers. And, ironically, there were things that were probably pre-accident, especially the couple of years before accident, were tools that I didn't know how to use, tools that were getting me in trouble, tools that were almost, I think, so many of my attributes were turned up to 11, and I didn't know how to control them. So within school or in class or maintaining relationships, and especially when you're 14 and hormonal as teenage boys can be, they were just too much. But then suddenly I'm in this context where I need everything turned up to 11. But that was only half of it. The other half was being surrounded by people that recognized that they were the things that I needed to lean into. So to be empowered to lean into exactly who I was, as best as you know yourself at 14, as best as you know your true self. I didn't have the capacity to think or to try to pretend to be anything other than myself because I was in survival mode. So I leaned into that, and they became the very things that then helped me really start taking more control over my own recovery. And as well, that was a huge step forward for me. I didn't have it in Dublin. I felt like I was, apart from 2 or 3 amazing characters, I felt like I was talked down to. It was very old school. It was, they would talk to the adults in the room rather than talk to me. And that just riled me up. So in a strange way, Mum and I, we look at, because she was my primary carer and there with me, the one that was there with me all the way through Dublin, it was almost like our foundation course, that when we arrived in London, we knew what didn't work and we knew what, in certain ways, what we needed. My mum needed to find allies to support her, knowing that the ones that were going to be potentially troublemakers, because there always are within hospital departments, the ones that are going to be there for you, that if you're not getting the care that you think your son needs, you go after. So she became formidable in that sense. And for me, it was, I need to start taking more charge of this, even though I'm only 14. I need to be involved in every conversation. Don't you talk to my parents before you talk to me. Talk to me, give me the information. If I have information, I can work on that information. The unknown's killing me, and everything needs to be there. And also realizing that it was an incredible strain on my immediate family and those around me. This was the most seismic thing that happened in all of our lives. When you suffer trauma as much as this, you very suffer in isolation. And once my mum got back to England, she was burst out of this bubble of being in Dublin. It was just her life. It was just me in the hospital. Suddenly she's back in the UK, and I'm one of 4 kids she's got. She's got an 11-year-old daughter at home who just started secondary school that she wasn't there for her first day. I had an older sister who was just entering the first year of university. Her mum wasn't there to take her to university, and a brother, a year further on than that. Mum happened to give up work. So financially, we're a working class family. And then my dad happened to be almost like the financial director. It's almost, I describe it, I sort of became, and maybe not consciously, again, this is me looking back and analysing the evidence that I remember, that it was like I became the CEO of my own recovery. And, my mum became almost my managing director, and, dad the financial director, and then other people had various roles. It was like a board of directors running things, and we were working with our clients, or were we with the clients? I'm not sure, but, our hospital carers. But I obviously wasn't thinking that way at the time, but it's a way for me to understand, looking back now, the roles that we played and the impact it had on how successful my recovery was, because ultimately it really was.
Yeah, I love that. CEO of my own recovery, with my board of directors in support. Unified, listening to each other, all with the same aim in mind. Because you were a victim, but you did not behave like one. Opposite of that, right? You took charge. You stepped into the driving seat, if we can use that metaphor. Was there a moment when you felt you were moving beyond at least that first part?
Yeah, there absolutely was. And this is, I guess, in my book, I'm going to be calling that sort of the mind section. So even the body was very, very much involved in enduring 30 plus operations. Once you move beyond survival and you allow your body just to take over, and it's almost like you drain your resources away from your brain and you just go with it and you endure. But it gets to a point then when you're setting precedents within yourself, you're reaching these milestones, you're realizing that you're capable of more, you can endure more, your pain tolerance gets higher, you go through various levels of mental acceptance. And that's when I talked about starting to want to lead, my own recovery. This is where my soul, my mind, whatever, like really sort of came to the forefront and started thinking about, a life beyond the four walls that I was in. And it's crazy. I've talked about this with my mum, and we look back at it like it's someone else's story. And even though all we were enduring, and so, like, for example, my right hand which was my dominant hand, was so badly damaged that I couldn't write with it. And obviously you need to write to get through school. And I was supposedly just entering my first of my 2 GCSE years, so 2 real pivotal years. And Mum had called school when I was in Dublin, not knowing really how serious she knew how serious it was, but not how long the recovery would be, and just said, make sure you keep a space open for him. Mark's going to be back at school, kind of saying it as a caring mother. Once we got back to Roehampton in London, the narrative, the word was, without even really talking to me, that, well, obviously he's not going back to school this year. He's definitely going to have to fall back a year. I heard that and I was like, I'm having none of that. So that really triggered something in me, like really competitively. And I refused to accept it. I look back now and I was like, I'm having 2-3 operations a week. This is, well into the autumn or fall term. And here I was saying, I'm telling you now, I'm not dropping back at school yet. Mm-hmm. And people around me were like, there's no way that you can go back to school this year. You've got so much, and you can't even write with your right hand. You're going to need to learn to write with your left hand. And there were so many obstacles in the way, and not only just from my side, but from the school side and the support side. And, did they have the capacity to support me? With the local council get involved? All these different things. But I knew, and this is one of the things consciously I knew back then, I knew that mentally that would break me. When you're a teenager and at school, the year above you seems so much older than you, and the year below you seems so much younger than you and inferior to you. And the thought that I would be going back into the year below and then watching all my peers and my friends the following year, 18 months later, over, take their GCSEs without me, and then either potentially leave the school or go on to college or whatever it may be, that made me not want to go on. So if there were ever thoughts that it might just be easier to check out, that was when those thoughts came in. So I knew it would break me. But the thought of going back to school as well was unbelievably fearful as well. I went to it was a strict Catholic, all boys, sports dominated school. So you can imagine the kind of toxic masculinity and status and the bullying that occurred in the school like that. So it was a tough school.
Yeah.
But for me, it was, and actually I only thought about this line at 4 o'clock in the morning last night when I had jet lag and couldn't sleep, that going back to school was like choosing the second cheapest bottle of wine on the list, right? The cheapest bottle of wine you can never choose. It's the one you don't go for. But you kind of, if you choose the next best, then you can kind of just about go with it. But actually, knowing that there was so much fear in dropping back was probably the first time that I then used fear as an unbelievable motivator to drive forward and to impact change in my life.
Yes.
Because everything then was targeted about me getting back to school. And then everything fed off that. My ability to endure the operations, the incredibly painful physio, learning, having to do everything again. Luckily there were hospital schools in those days until the funding got taken away. We campaigned for that a couple of years later and failed, unfortunately. But without that, I never would have made it back to that school year. So going in, and when my left hand wasn't strapped up or full of pins, then I was in there every single day trying to hold a pencil or a pen with my left hand and trying to rewire my brain and trying to do everything I can, learning how to use a computer. Meanwhile, my mum and Ruth, the community nurse, were out there just bashing doors down, bashing heads together to make it happen. Once they realised that I was accepting nothing less, and they probably realised that this was hugely important for my mental recovery, they just went to war for me. And to see that happen and do that, and the amount of effort that people were making for me, it's like, I can't let you down. So I was super motivated by setting these goals and these targets, but also I was very, very motivated by not letting people down.
Yes.
And realising, God, these people are just going above and beyond, and it's extraordinary what they're trying to do for me. I have to make sure that I'm at 100% every single day when I'm capable and driving forward and to make this happen.
It really does work that way, doesn't it? You were super clear about what you needed and wanted. They understood that. They supported you 1,000%. And that in turn supports your capacity to do this thing, this goal that you've set yourself, to meet it, despite everything and how hard that must have been. Yeah, the fear of falling behind, the fear of not having a normal, in quotation marks, life drove, motivated you, was the sort of driver, and then the determination, the competitiveness, the stubbornness, the curiosity, all those qualities that again supported your capacity to meet that need. So you went back to school, you got the qualifications you needed, you went forward with your life. And as you came into adulthood, what choices did you make then?
Decisions I made then were, so at this really seismic moment when I made it to university, there's, a lot of the other narratives that were floating around was, would Marc ever even be able to live an independent life? Again, that was fuel to me, again, it's like hearing stuff like that and, feeding into, no, I'm going to prove you wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So that was huge. So having to rewire my brain to use my hands and, really I started to look at them as tools rather than hands. And we don't realise that how many things that we do automatically, subconsciously, that our brain is like wired to do, to pick up a glass, to open a door handle, to do your shoelaces, to use cutlery, to pick up a pen, and we're talking hundreds of things every single day. And everything I had to approach brand new and be conscious of every single thing I'm doing to allow the brain to rewire. It was like starting from scratch again. But hearing these people say that, you might not be able to live independently again. Okay, well then I had to set some new goals. And, my new goal once I got back to school and somehow got my GCSEs, got 5 of them. It's all I needed to move on, which no one thought I could do. The next big goal, the next big mountain to climb was getting to university. And university to me and living independently was the end boss goal. That was everything. So everything was targeted towards that. And then I made that happen. But I also made there was the physical side of things, but there was a huge mental side of things as well. So the physical side I've just covered is about rewiring the brain. Many people might think it's horrifically tragic and pity any 14-year-old that has to suffer what I did. But it was also a time where I was going through probably the second biggest growth spurt of my life, and I was seriously neuroplastic. So my brain had the ability to rewire and to create new software to match this new hardware that had been given suddenly. So there was all the physical side to that, and then me just spending hours in my bedroom practicing things away from prying eyes, because I hated people looking at me trying to struggle. And it was the thought of like, are they thinking, do they want to help me? Should they step in? Shouldn't they step in? All that. So I'd spend hours away from people just practicing. But then the other side of it was the mental side of it, and the ability to just, and this is for anyone, when you leave home and you go to university for the first time, you're not living with your parents, you're on your own, all that responsibility. My 2 nieces are in their first year of university now and going through the ups and downs of that first term. And they've had very relatively normal, as we said in the speech marks, teenage lives compared to me. But when I went back to school, I was wrapped up in cotton wool like you wouldn't believe. I was untouchable, which is great. if anyone came near me or said anything, they were looking at getting expelled. So it was a super, super safe environment, but it wasn't real. So before I even took my GCSEs, I came in one night to mum and dad after school and declared that I want to leave John Fisher, my school, and I want to go to the local sixth form college. And they were just like, that can't happen. You're not doing that. So we had another whole thing about everyone saying that can't happen and look at all the school have done for you and this and that. And already, even before I'd gotten my GCSEs, because it was another miracle that I even passed them, it's like somehow I just got through them. So there could have been a chance I had to retake them anyway. But I was already planning the next stage before I had those results. And I convinced them and I said, well, I'm going to look at a college tonight. You can come with me or not. And they were like, oh, okay then. And just to give a bit more context, by this point I was wearing a clear plastic face splint as well that I had to wear 24 hours a day for 2 years. So it was like a sentence within a sentence, really. So if I didn't look scary enough, you put a plastic mask on someone and, they're going to look a bit more intimidating. But then I convinced everyone, the school were upset because by that point they were kind of, holding me up in hero status and wanting to maybe get a little bit of that glory for themselves in terms of reputation as a school and what we do for our students. But I was like, I'm off. And again, it was another very conscious decision at the time. There's a lot that I look back at and I'm seeing now through the eyes of the present. But I remember that if I'm ever going to make it and to university and cope, then the step up from John Fisher Sixth Form College within that super safe environment to university would have been too great. So I needed to challenge myself in that moment and leave and go to this local college, a lot rougher than the school, mixed genders as well, very rough and ready, but a brilliant college as well for their results. And they welcomed me with open arms and I rocked up there, still wearing the splint and just thought, right, okay, if I can go into this environment and I can cope with this environment, I can cope with the step of going to university. Because at least by making these seismic changes to my scenario now, I still go home to my mum and dad every night. I can shut that door off and I'm in a safe space. So whatever bumps there were along the way, whatever levels of acceptance of myself or in the eyes of others, whatever I needed to learn, I could learn in those 2-3 years there. And then I got to university, I got my A-levels, and I remember getting dropped off and standing said goodbye to my parents, shut the door, and I stood there in the hallway, and I tell you, I just got this all over body feeling. It's like every single hair on my body was stood up, but then there was just even more electricity going through me, and I just instinctively just looked to the skies, and it was just like, you've done it, kid. You've absolutely done it. Yeah. So in my mind, that was when the kind of official recovery period was over. All the operations behind me, I've got my independence, and now it was up to me to make whatever it was of my life from there on.
Yeah, like a real threshold. We talk about threshold stages of life, but that really wasn't it? It was everything that you'd fought for, worked hard for, prepared for. And it was a strategy, wasn't it? I mean, you knew where you wanted to go, and you knew yourself well enough, your capabilities well enough to know what you needed to do to get there well, to be properly prepared for that very important stage of your life. And how did that go? Did it live up to your hopes and dreams?
Yeah, I think even more so. It was the kind of the second chance, the sense of perspective that you have, and that I was trying to, bury the previous 5 years in the past. It was more that, wow, I've got a choice now. I've got independence. I've got this whole world in front of me. And it began this era that I call, my running into life era. And this isn't probably black and white. There's probably a little bit of, grey area in between. But I wasn't trying to run away from my trauma and forget it. It was more that, again, maybe this is my competitiveness coming in and believer and balance in the universe or something. It's like, well, if there is any greater powers out there, be it God, universe, whatever it may be, and me as a human has had to endure more in the last 5 years than most people would have probably need to endure in 10 lifetimes, then surely I made some good stuff, right? And some fun. Surely it's there. But there was this, and my mum always remembers from early on that, which she just found remarkable, is that from the very first moment, I held my head up. And I held my head up and I looked into the world. I wasn't looking down at the ground. You know, I would look people in the faces. I would connect with them in certain ways. And, you know, at first I would stare them out until they stared away and, you know, how dare they? And then one day I actually smiled at this woman. I had a real worry on her face in the corridor, and I just smiled at her. And just the power of that smile just opened her up, and her fear and pity just went to like awe. And that was a hugely important lesson, that I realised that the onus was on me. Right? I had the power to create, and I had to learn how to create connections with people really quickly. And I was fearful that they were thinking something about me that wasn't true. So therefore it was on me to allow them in, to show openness and vulnerability, but also show strength, and to tell them that I was fine. And it's incredible what you can do with just the eyes and a smile without saying a word. So I kind of learned that, okay, and this is another area of kind of leading my own way forward, that the onus is on me. So I got to university and the beginning of this running into life, and I thought I could sit back and just think and, you know, feel pity for myself and think, well, if there is any kind of that power out there, they need to bring it to me. And I was like, no. It's like, I'm going to go and get mine, and not in a selfish, self-centered way that at the cost of anyone else. Because, you know, all my experiences have just had helped me evolve all these areas of compassion and empathy and understanding, and a level of emotional intelligence that I didn't have the words for back then, but we're, you know, much more within our kind of modern day vocabulary now.
Yeah.
For me, it was just, no one's going to hand it on a plate for me, but the opportunities are out there. I seem to have my head up and looking around and be way more conscious than other people around me. So you spot these opportunities. It's, you know, a lot of people have got to know me later in life and didn't know this period of my life. Just, you know, call me a lucky bastard. You know, if luck does exist, then I got a lot of my bad luck out of the way within a very, very short period of time. So maybe if they are right, then fair play. But for me, these opportunities are there for everyone. It's just whether or not you're willing to reach out and grab them.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm going to grab these opportunities, every single opportunity, until I've reconciled with what's happened to me, until I've evened up the score with the universe. And obviously there's setbacks and highs and lows, because it wasn't like suddenly I was like Teflon and life didn't impact me. You know, I was still quite a normal human being, just on a slightly altered path to everyone else. You know, I could see them alongside me, but I became a go-getter. And that led to 25 years of wonderful experiences and adventures and connections and travels and following a very unconventional path. And God, I'm so thankful that I did that, because the conventional path is, I know so many people now middle-aged that have followed the so-called conventional path and the so-called markers to happiness or contentment or whatever you want to call it. And then they got to a point in their life and they're miserable and they're struggling and they're like, but I followed the rules. I did what I was supposed to do. None of those markers were available for me, so I had to forge my own path forward. And that was so empowering. And it's that, you know, to know that there's so much uncertainty in front of me just made me realise that, okay, well, then maybe I can go and select the stuff that actually makes a difference.
Yes.
Rather than what anyone else thinks. You know, it's that real living from the inside out rather than outside in. And again, I didn't have those words at the time.
But they came to you, didn't they? They came to you through a series of experiences that you've kindly shared. From the small meeting, or the apparently small meeting, with the woman in the corridor of the school, that you smiled and it changed everything in that moment. And you realizing that the onus was on you. I think those are the words you used. Taking full responsibility for your life. So in this extreme adversity of that event, so many gifts. And I know that in the work you're doing now, and this is a relatively recent decision in your life, isn't it, in the last few years, that you want to share your experience in a way that others can learn from. So some of these things that you've said, I can't help feeling, do apply to all of us in our life. What I'm hearing is, don't expect things to come to you. Go out and find them. Decide what you want. Get clear about what matters. You can, if you really want to, make it happen. That's what I'm hearing, Mark. Is that how it feels?
Yes, that's absolutely how it feels. And I think that's the most wonderful thing in the world, to realise that half of it is on you, or even more than half of it is on you. And so many of our frustrations that I see in other people are why aren't people there for them, or what's going on with the world, are all these things that we're wanting everybody else to change almost before, we're willing to change ourselves. The Gandhi quote that's misquoted, and then Greta used it. It's, be the change that you want to see in the world. But I just add in another word to that. It's like, be the change you want to see in your world. Make it smaller. Stop thinking about the enormity of the world and the global problems you've got going on. Make your world a pond and turn yourself into that pebble and drop yourself and see the ripples that create, and you'll impact those around you. But it's also the power of connection and community is huge as well. And it's not about being surrounded by people who you want to serve you in a way that to make your life easier. You want people around you that will empower you. And, my recovery was, I look back and it was almost a perfect storm. And it would be hard to replicate, the incredible amount of things that had to be in place to turn my story into one of triumph over tragedy. The family unit I had, the parents who paid things so far forward in their community without ever expecting anything to be paid back. And then suddenly the worst thing possible almost happens. And everything that they did in the years before just came back in droves, and the community wrapped themselves around you. And I had people, well, I probably refused it as well, just because of my personality. Pity and sympathy, there were checks that I couldn't cash. There were times when the people around me needed to lift me because I couldn't even stand. But then when I could stand, they were like, okay, now it's time to use your own legs. So having been understanding all that at such a critical age of 14 is just where most people can spend an entire life trying to understand it and make sense of it. It was just like the biggest gift. But if I'd tried to forget and bury that and not spend the last 2 or 3 years going into the deepest parts of my story, shining a light in the shadows that a lot of people would completely understand if I didn't want to do that. As you said, like, along with the trauma of where the biggest gifts happen. So if we can find a safe way for me to use the best resource that we have, and is our own lived experiences, it's internal, it's free, it's accessible to you. If I can find a way to inspire people by the way that I've processed my story, to go back and process the story in a different way and in a safe way, to make sure that you're doing it when you are still surrounded by people, if you do stumble, that need to pick you back up, because it's not easy always going back and, unearthing these traumas. But there's gold buried alongside those traumas and those gifts. And they're the things that you can take, and then you can bring those back into your present. And those other things, they just become stories that live in your past, and they don't have to impact the present. So that's really where this has become more than a job for me. It's becoming a vocation. And if I can use this extreme adversity not only to better my life and make me as relaxed and as contented and as connected as I've ever been, but also to be that pebble that drops in my own pond and create ripple effects to help those around me. And then if enough of us live on our own little ponds and drop pebbles, and our little ripples become waves, become tsunamis of change. So that's the now and the future that I really want to live.
Yeah. And when you look to that future, Mark, which feels deeply inspiring, what does Fearless Forward mean to you?
Fearless Forward means using my past as fuel instead of as a cage. Writing my story has shown me that when you look back with love, not fear, you unlock the gifts inside the hardest moments. Fear still turns up, but right now it's I walk forward guided with wisdom that those moments gave me. So that's what Fearless Forward means to me.
Mark, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Absolute pleasure.
Very best wishes for the beautiful future ahead of you.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for brilliant work in this area.
When you look back with love, not fear, you unlock the gifts inside the hardest moments. What changed everything for Mark wasn't his horrific accident. It was the moment he decided not to be defined by it. He took charge of his own recovery, physically and mentally. He insisted on keeping pace with his contemporaries, of hitting the same milestones, of leading a normal life. And he realized that the onus was on him to make others feel comfortable with what he had to bear. He learned the true power of compassionate connection. For Marc, fear still turns up, but he walks forward, guided by the wisdom his difficult moments have given him. And it feels as if he's just getting started. His childhood accident is fueling a lifelong vocation to help others turn towards their difficult experiences and find the gifts in them. Thank you for listening. Fearless Forward is edited and produced by Mark Steadman. I'll be back with you in 2 weeks for our next conversation about how leaders have faced their fears. To be sure of catching it, go to fearlessforward.org or subscribe to my weekly bulletin at skillfulleaders.com.